that's pretty much it. Let's get started. Damien has introduced me pretty well, but I thought I would talk to you a little bit about myself, a little bit more, not too much, but just so that you understand a bit about my background and how it might have shaped, my experience and the tips that I'll give you today. So obviously there are very different ways we can use co-design and workshops, and so I think it's useful for you to understand how I use it or how it shaped my career. So yeah, my name is Etienne. If you haven't guessed already, or I'm French, but I've worked in the first half of my career as a user experience designer. So designing websites and intranets and apps for different digital agencies in Europe mostly, but then in Australia for the second part of my career. I've been here for around 8 years now. I was traveling around Australia initially, and I decided to come to Canberra to attend a design conference. Everyone were asking me, why would you do that? But I did, and I did well, because on that day, my life took an unexpected turn of events, I guess, because I met my wife here and I never left. It's a pretty classic story. But professionally since then, I've become much more familiar with government work, as you can imagine, still in the user experience design field and the service design, but mostly for government. So for the last 3 years, I think it's important I mention I've been the head of design at Core Delta Digital. And together we've really worked on some pretty large scale projects across government. We've worked for the Department of Home Affairs, for example, essentially replacing the border.gov.au website with an entire digital ecosystem. And that included a dedicated website for immigration, one for the Australian Border Force, a complete design system, and a lot more. So it was a pretty big project with a lot of stakeholders, and we had plenty of opportunities to work on workshops and so on. So I learned a few things there. Also worked with Fair Work Commission, Department of Defense, Department of Employment, Health, a few not-for-profit like Vinnie's, for example, private sector organizations as well. And basically my involvement in all of this was mostly from the strategic perspective. So I help scope projects and design roadmaps and lead the team through the end-to-ends. And a lot of what I do is really around the engagement of stakeholders and subject matter experts and policy owners or business teams or all different types of people. And I try to bring them on with us on the journey, really, so that they're part of the process, from the initial kickoff to the discovery research that we can do, where we advocate about the end users, or the co-design process that we do, the whole process, the whole thing. So anyway, enough about me, and let's get on with why we're here for today. So if you allow me, I'd like to tell you a quick story that kind of brought the idea of giving this talk today. So it's kind of where everything started. So I thought I would share that story. I'm aware the image that you're seeing may not resonate with everyone, especially the attendees from overseas. I'm also aware no good story ever started with once upon a time in government, but I'll stick to it. So here goes. A few weeks ago, I was heading to a meeting, first thing in the morning, 9:45 or so. I was there a bit early, and so I sat down in the lobby of the building I was going to, and I was waiting for the person I was meeting to come down and escort me, and the kind of things. And at that point, 3 men walked in. So it's not like one of those jokes where three men walk into a bar and blah, blah, blah. But where they were waiting for the elevator, one of them started to talk to the other and asked about a recent meeting and asking how it went. And the two others started to respond with a lot of, sizing and moaning and grimacing and all of this. And they used quite colorful words that I probably shouldn't repeat here. But it basically they were saying how boring it was, how bad the meeting had been. And so the first one asked what happened really. And one of them said, oh, another one of those 3 hours long remote workshops on Miro. So at that stage, I was kind of shaking my head a little bit. Of course, I sympathize. We've all been in very, very boring, very unproductive meetings. That happens too often. But as I kind of plan these meetings myself quite often, facilitate them, this anecdote made me wonder how people might think about the sessions I run. And beyond that, I also, wondering how can we make this kind of collaboration less boring, more engaging, more effective, and so on. obviously, most of us have been working remotely for a long time, and we all kind of, the honeymoon period is starting to pass now, and there's a lot of talk about Zoom fatigue, which is very true. There's a lot of scientific studies showing that the effects on morale and mental health is quite serious. So I'm definitely acknowledging that. But what I wanted to say is that there are some inherent issues, of course, with remote working. So we're staring at a screen, first of all, for the better part of the day. We have less opportunities to stretch our legs and go for a quick walk from one meeting room to another, for example. And all the incidental kind of social interactions at the coffee place, or just chatting to someone in the hallway, these kind of things. So of course your cat is keeping you warm at home, and it's cuddly, but it's not as great as your colleagues to have a conversation or bounce ideas and collaborate. So just want to acknowledge that there are some issues that are inherent. We can alleviate some of them with some tools and tricks, but there's also things we can't change. So you obviously understand that you can get information through a video conference pretty easily, but it's hard to get inspired, for example. So, in a face-to-face meeting, what should be dynamic, it often feels dull online. It's boring. So in particular, I think what we're losing is the ability to relate to each other, to build rapport, to read the room, to read someone's body language, to feel the energy, these kind of things. So that's very true. That happens. But a point that I wanted to make was, if you think about it, face-to-face meetings, they also have a lot of issues. It's not like this is all new to us. If we all remember what it was back in the days when we were spending our time in the boardrooms, sitting in meetings all day, there are also plenty of issues with this. So the point I'm trying to make is that face-to-face or remote, or meetings versus workshops, a lot of the issues are the same. There are some differences, but a lot of them are the same. And essentially, in all this context, what we're trying to do is to bring different people and bring them together to talk about a problem, talk about a project, or whatever it might be, and come up with a solution all together, rather than individually. We're trying to leverage collective intelligence. But the problem is, most meetings, most workshops, they end up just being a bit of a chat, really. They're often unprepared, or there is no tangible outcome, a bit unproductive. So the good news is that there are tools and tips and techniques that we can use to make meetings and workshops a bit more effective, a bit more collaborative. And I'm going to try to go through a few of them today with you. So I hope it sounds good. Just now that we've put the introduction out of the way, I'm going to talk to you about a framework. So basically some high-level concepts that you can apply to every meeting, every workshop, to make them a bit better. And I'll try to give you a bit more of a practical tools and tips and tricks conversation about how to run these workshops, what to do and when. And then I try to kind of condense all of that into an example so that it's a little bit more tangible, and to walk you through a small, short and sharp workshop, show you the different activities and how I would do them. At the end, hopefully we'll have time for a few questions. So once again, if you've got any questions or any feedback at any point, just write it down, the chat, and we'll try to tackle that later. So let's get started. What's the framework? Well, my apologies first of all, because I don't want to use too many buzzwords, but it's just I couldn't find a better word for that. So it's really that high-level concept, these big tools that we can use to make meetings better. So what does that look like? Well, first of all, I should basically tell you what co-design means for me, or what I understand from co-design. So it might be self-explanatory, I don't know, but I think there are a few things to note. First of all, when I talk about design, and I talk about design a lot, I don't necessarily mean designing a website, an app, or an intranet, or any digital stuff. It can be designing anything. And I think design as a whole is about solving problem in its purest form. So it can be anything. What we're going to talk about today can be applied to any problem, really. It can be discussing your service offering, or redesigning your office space, or planning the IABC Christmas party, whatever it might be. You could apply the same principle pretty much. Now, co-design obviously stands for collaborative design. So the basic idea is to bring different people in the process. Instead of having one or two designers going through the problem and trying to find solutions on their own, they bring people from different trades. And so we get them to work with one another, and your role is to explain that you help them explain their perspectives, really help them communicate, help them understand each other, help them all contribute by bringing their own perspectives, but then collectively find a solution that's optimal. So we obviously want to take the end users into consideration all throughout the project, but we also need to acknowledge that doing what users want is not enough. You also need to make sure that whatever solution you come up with, it's economically viable, it's technically feasible, it's legally compliant, it's affordable for your business. It's, you know, it's a good solution from all these different aspects. So you need people from different trades to help inform that process. So it's all good, it works well. But the main challenge is, as illustrated in the little video that's not working at the moment, is that the main challenge is really the communication aspect. How do you get people from different trades with different expectations, different backgrounds, different focus and different agenda to work with one another, to avoid biases, to really communicate well, and to avoid all the mishaps that could happen, information falling through the cracks and so on. So it's all about helping these people, you as a facilitator, on understanding each other, working with one another, and getting to the best outcome. I'll just stay here for a couple of seconds so you can see the outcome of the video. Basically, they don't really understand each other, and the end game is not quite what we were expecting. So here you go. So how do we make that better? How do we avoid this problem of communications? Well, this is where our old friend design thinking comes into play. Now, I know the design thinking is probably a bit cringy for some of you. It's been around for a long time. It's still very confusing for a lot of people. And you don't need to understand all of it. I'm going to try to keep it super simple. But essentially, it just forces you, or it just brings a bit of structure to the process. So instead of you walking up in a meeting and trying to talk about a project and sort it out, you're going to have different steps, different exercises, different phases to go through to force you to have a proper process, and that avoids biases and stop you from jumping to conclusion, for example, or get straight onto the tools and start rushing with one particular solution. So how does that do that? Well, it's basically like a friend that's giving you advice in your ears, but essentially it forces you to slow down and to save time to explore the situation through different angles before you even decide what to work on. Or it forces you to generate many, many different ideas before you decide which one to go with at the end. So it's a bit more rational and objective. So in an abstract way, here's what it looks like. You've probably seen that double diamond before. The first diamond is really about designing the right thing, or as I like to put it, it's about identifying what to work on. And it's all about understanding the context, identifying the priorities, the problems to be solved, the user needs, the business constraints, trying to get as much information as possible, and then converge to 1 or 2 or 3 problems that you're really going to focus on, and you're going to ignore everything else for now. So in the middle of the 2 diamonds, you've got a problem statement usually, and you usually have a bit of an assessment on whether it's even worthy to go further on the project. The second diamond on the right is about designing the thing right, or designing whatever solution the best way possible. So once again, it's about most teams make the mistakes of just jumping on the conclusion, and they've got one obvious idea, it's half a decent one, so they go with it, and they forget to explore other ideas. So that process forces you to slow down.
ET, can I just interrupt for 1 sec? Just sorry to interrupt your flow. Can you just transfer me as the host? I just need to let other people in. I think you're the host. I can't access. Sorry, mate. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, that's okay. I can try to do that.
Yeah, and I'll take care of that while you're going on.
I think I have to stop sharing. I can admit all, and I can make hosts.
Yeah, IABC camera as the host. That would be great.
Yeah, and then but then I can't share my screen, so that's not going to work. So okay. I'm going to go back. So can you make me back the host? And then I'll try to stay up to date and admit people as we go.
Cool. There's just a few people there, but yeah. Okay, you're back to host.
All right, let's go back.
Let them in. That'll be great. Sorry, mate.
That's okay. Here we go. So yeah, defining what to work on and then designing it the best way possible, basically. So that's pretty big abstract concepts. At the end, you get a problem solved. That's great. But how do you do that? And how do you translate that into a bit simpler way? So how does that help you make better workshops and become a remote collaboration mastermind, pretty much? Well, here's the good news. You don't need to be a design thinking expert to run great workshops. That's a relief because I'm not. But personally, it took me years of trial and errors and running workshops over time and being late or having participants who are bored or just workshops that don't achieve the right outcome. But what I've started to realize after over the years is that the good workshops, the one that went well, they kind of all had the same pattern. They had the same structure. I was running different activities, but they were kind of following the same structure. So obviously you want to tailor each session, each workshop, each meeting to the project, to the time you have, to the medium you're using, to the people in the room, more importantly. But the good workshops, they kind of follow the same backbone. They have comparable phases, I guess. They're built on the same kind of steps. So they use a framework. And so the good news is that you can learn that framework and adapt it and reuse it to pretty much any problem. So what's that framework? Well, it's trying to keep it super simple. It's loosely based on this design thinking approach, but it's 4 simple steps. So the first one is about collecting information. It's critical. Every workshop should start with collecting information about the context, the business, the users, what has been tried before, any research that already exists. You can ask your team what they think, their past experience, their knowledge about the topic, really. If there is any data available anywhere, Google Analytics, if that's a digital project, or any research, any survey, anything at all that you can use to really understand the broad picture before you decide what to work on. That's critical. The second step of the framework is about choosing a problem. Most projects, they already got some form of brief. Someone has decided for you what you're going to work on, and you've got a scope. But even then, it's still useful to try to reopen the conversation on what you should actually focus on. Someone comes to you and say, hey, I need a newsletter. Hey, I need a marketing campaign. Hey, I need a new website, or whatever it is. You should always ask yourself, actually, is that the best thing to do? Is there anything else that we could work on? Is there any other way we could solve the same problem? So choosing a problem is really trying to bring rationality to get a clear focus. And it's super important down the track because you want your team to know exactly what we're working on rather than exploring another idea that could solve another problem just because they're interested in. Everyone should be on the same topic and solve the same problem. Step number 3 is about generating ideas of solution. So once again, as I said before, most teams just run with the first half decent idea they have. And quite often, you just run out of inspiration once you've had a good idea. But with a bit of process, with a few tips and tools that you can use, you can train the team to generate more ideas. And more ideas means overall, you're going to have a few good ones. So at this stage, it's not about solutions, it's about listing ideas. They shouldn't be fully fleshed. They shouldn't be flawless. We're not prioritizing yet. We're just listing and generating as much quantity as possible. And the last step of the framework is really about how do you going to prioritize all of that? Because people have biases. We all have different perspectives. And sometimes, what's hard when you're trying to generate ideas is because you've had one that's good and it just becomes harder. So you need to bring the tools to help participants prioritize the ideas rationally rather than going through your gut feel pretty much, or ask your boss to decide for you or anything like that. So it's quite important to have the right tool for this. Now, that doesn't mean every single workshop follows these 4 steps and has 4 activities and so on. This is a framework. So the best facilitators have dozens of different activities or exercises that they can run to meet or to match each of these phases. And sometimes you want to combine several of them. So I've listed a few here. Some of the names of the activities might be common or popular enough that you've heard of them or you've done them before. So personalized user journey, crazy 8s, all this stuff to help you achieve these different goals of the different steps. We're going to go through a few. I'll give you a few examples on what that look like. But first, now you understand the 4 basic steps of the framework. You also know it takes a lot more to prepare a workshop. You need to decide how long and how many people and what activities and so on. So let's talk a bit about these kind of things, the tools and how to prepare, how to plan. So we talk about in-person and remote workshop, and that's the first thing you need to decide. So obviously, depending on where you are in the world at the moment, you may not have a choice at all. You may work fully remote, your team may be distributed across the world. So in that case, well, you go with what you can. But let's assume you're in a place like Canberra where some people are going back to the office and you do have a choice. Now, some people say, well, if you have a choice, you should do it face-to-face because it's better. You can read the body language and so on. And it's entirely true. There are plenty of very good, very strong benefits of doing this kind of collaboration face-to-face. It's easier to do well, by the way. But I also want to emphasize that there are some very strong points for making collaboration remote. In fact, there are many companies at the moment, especially the tech giants, but not only, who are fully remote. And even if they can, they decided not to go back to the office. So it's a good thing to just think about that and consider whether you should go remote or not. So for the perspective of today, we're going to talk about remotes. And so the first thing you have to do is basically think about your agenda. What are you going to work on? Who are going to be participating in that meeting? When are you going to run it? What sort of activities are you going to go? Again, following the 4 steps framework, but for each step, which activity, which exercise you're going to use, which tool you're going to use, and so on. Have a clear agenda, all that stuff. So there's a lot of preparation. Now, if you've never been in a remote meeting or a remote workshop, lucky you, I guess, I just wanted to show you what it might look like just in case. So there are many tools that we call virtual whiteboards, and they're basically trying to replicate what we used to do in a boardroom, in a meeting room, with physical whiteboards on the wall and Sharpies and so on. But they try to do that online. And the benefit of that is that everyone can go to the tool. You just send them a link, it's like a website, and they can collaborate at the same time. In real time, you can see people moving and doing different things. They can draw, they can write, they can share photos, they can do a lot of stuff. And that means we're all collaborating at the same time. If you think about it, in a face-to-face meeting, there's always one person speaking at one time. And that means it's quite different in the interaction. So there are different tools. In my opinion, they're pretty much all the same. Or at least, even if they're not, you can always work around to achieve what you want, regardless of the tool. It's obviously slightly different depending on where you work, especially in government. You may not have access to some of those tools, but quite often it's quite fine. Most organizations have access to Microsoft Teams, for example, even Mural or Miro. My favorite is probably Mural, but it's a short win. I just like the ability to double click and that creates a post-it notes. So it's easier like this, and it's probably a bit easier on the eye as well, but really doesn't matter to me. It doesn't really matter to me. The thing that you want to do once you've selected the tool, though, is really spend some time preparing your board. The material you're going to use. It's basically the equivalent of your workshop supplies and the Sharpies and the post-it notes. And I really spend a lot of time preparing that. I think the more you prepare that, the easier it gets to run the workshop. So I've shown you an example here that's quite visual, but I usually put a welcome message on the left that repeats the agenda, and clear signage to guide people through. The colors help a lot, so you can tell people, okay, now we're going to move on to the pink part. Now we're going to move on to the right on the green part, these kind of things. But one thing that's super important, I can't stress that enough, is you need to lock everything on the board. So what I mean was, every one of these components, you can interact with it. People can move it, change the size, change color, these kind of things. And so it can very, very quickly become a massive mess. So what you want to do as a facilitator is, before the beginning of the session, you select everything that you're not expecting people to touch, and you right click and click lock, so that you're the only one who can move them. It's super important, otherwise it becomes a mess. I've been in a workshop once where someone created couldn't zoom in and out, I think, so they created massive, gigantic post-it notes. So nobody else could work because everything else was behind and hidden behind. It becomes a mess very quickly. So lock everything. On the day, there are quite a few things to think about. As a broad concept, you really need to help people settle in. And that's because these tools can be quite overwhelming. Sometimes, especially if you've never used them before. There's a lot of things moving around, a lot of people working at once. So welcome people, give them context of why we're here, repeat the intent, ask people to mute themselves unless they need to contribute, or mute themselves yourself. and repeat the instructions. You really need to guide people at every step and tell them what they're supposed to do and repeat and repeat. Very important things to make the meetings less boring is to change the flow and pace. So you want to bring a little bit of humor if you can. It doesn't have to be all serious. You want to bring different breaks at different times. Usually a 10-minute break every hour or so is good. You want to stay on the line as a facilitator during the break, because sometimes people start talking to you and give you very good insights. But also it's in the activities you choose, the exercises. You don't want all of them to be individual work, for example. You want individual work and then group work. You want people to have time to talk to each other and time where they work alone. So for example, if you've got very big workshops with a lot of people, dozens or hundreds of participants, it's really difficult to talk to each other and it takes a lot of time. So what you can do with some of these tools like Zoom, for example, is to create breakout rooms where if you had 100 participants, you can create a number of groups of 5 people. For example, say they go away automatically into a smaller chat room. They talk to each other for 10, 20 minutes, whatever you want. And then you can automatically bring them back. So it's almost like a face-to-face workshop where people are on a separate tables and they can talk to each other. It's a pretty nifty tool that's useful for very big workshop. But also just asking people regularly to share their thoughts, if they have feedback or questions on. And then at the end, also very important to have a very clear wrap-up, to thank people for their time, for their contributions, ask for feedback or any last thoughts. It's usually at the last minute that people start telling you very, very interesting stuff. Explain what the next step might be. You need a clear outcome. And stay there on the line. You need to be the last one because, again, people talk up to the last minute. Very quick point about should you break the ice or not. It's quite controversial. I would say if you're not sure, don't. Nothing worse than a lame icebreaker. Don't do the same icebreaker with several people. Usually you want to try to do something that's quite relevant to the crowd. So these examples on the screen, we worked with people who are, working in the sports industry. So it was quite easy to talk about sports team and mascots and names of teams and so on, just as a quick exercise. But one of the main benefits of the icebreaker, if you decide to do them, is that it's a good opportunity for people to get familiar with the tool. Might be the first time they use it. You ask them to start creating Post-it notes. You ask them to move around the board. And just for the first 5 minutes, 10 minutes, they're going to start understanding how it works. That means the next activity is going to be a lot more productive. So usually I try to do a creative warm-up, but don't do lame ones. Don't ask for, intimate stuff or bad experiences or anything like that. No, don't do that. Now, big questions about remote workshop. How do you increase creativity? How do you make sure that people really have good ideas? It's a very big question. I don't have enough time to cover it well, but there are a number of tools you can use. For example, bringing some inspiration to the table. Yourself, for example, you can have done some homework before and bring some images to share for everyone to look at, to review, to decide what's good, what's not. I'm just going to go back on the screen right now. And you can also ask people to do some homework themselves. So you can, before the session, you can ask them to look at things and bring some ideas to make sure that on the day you've got things to discuss. And the more you review each other's ideas, the more people have new ideas. So there are a number of tools you can use. How to avoid biases. That's one of the biggest issues with face-to-face meetings. So how do we do better online? Well, as I said before, in a face-to-face meeting, there is only one person speaking at a time, and it's usually the most articulate or the highest paid person or the loudest person that's going to win the argument. So one of the benefits of doing that online is that usually people work at the same time, especially when you generate ideas or you create materials, you ask people to share their experience. When you create something, you want people to work individually. When you review work, when you discuss, when you share, when you feedback, when you critique, then that's a group activity. And just the fact that people work individually all at once in their own space, that avoids a lot of biases, because then suddenly all the ideas are at the same level. Whether you're the boss or the intern, your idea is worth the same. There are also a number of ways you can then start prioritizing ideas a bit more rationally rather than going through a gut feel. So that also avoid biases. You can use metrics like this, for example, where you benchmark or rank ideas across different value or effort required or impact, these kind of things. So there you have. I know that was pretty quick. I'm sure you've got a lot of questions, but I was trying to give you a few tips. If you do have any questions, please type them in. But now that we've talked a little bit about the overall framework, and I've given you a few tools and tips and tricks, so it's still a bit abstract. So I think I wanted to give you a tangible exercise or show you what a workshop might look like from an end-to-end point of view. So there's nothing better than a concrete example. So yeah, I thought I would show you one of my favorite workshops that I call the Swiss Army knife workshop. And I'll explain why in a minute. Basic idea is that it's short and sharp, so pretty simple. But the key thing with this is that you can use it to work on pretty much anything. So it's very generic in that sense. So regardless of topic or the amount of time you have, you can just use that workshop. May not be perfect for everything, but it's going to help you in many times, especially if you're unprepared. Quite often someone grabs you and say, hey, can we work about this thing? Because he's not sure what to do. And you know, oh, it's going to be a very long conversation and pretty unproductive. You can just do that workshop pretty much unprepared. So I thought I would walk you through this one. But to do that, I'm going to take an example. I thought about the Christmas party, but try to take something a bit more tangible for you. We're going to pretend that your team has been working remotely, as it may have been, and the honeymoon period is over. Everyone's getting tired. The productivity is going down. I don't know, people are less responsive or morale is getting low or whatever the issues might be. That's the point. We're going to try to discuss that and work it out. So you've came to my webinar. You've been inspired by all the greatness and the examples and so on that I've given you. So you decide to give it a go and you invite your team to a workshop. And since some people in your team are still working remotely, we're going to do that online on the tool that you want. Doesn't matter. So let's kick off this workshop by using the first step of the framework, the collect phase. So you need an activity that will help you collect information about how the team is doing, the challenges they're facing, understand the situation from different perspectives. So the exercise I've picked is called the sailboat. Could have been another one, but I've picked this one. It's a good one. I haven't invented it, by the way. It's pretty common. You may have heard of it, especially for teams who are doing retrospectives in agile work. But basically, we're trying to discuss how everyone is feeling, what's working well, what could be improved, and so on. So pretty simple. The goal is to get an idea of the challenges. And the first step is just to collect as much information and then to visualize that information, to organize it visually so that everyone can review it and understand. So where do we start? Well, the team is at the center. And then you start talking about what it is that the team is trying to achieve. As in very broad goal vision, what are we trying? What are we in this for? What are we trying to achieve? What's the goal? It's super important that we understand why we're in this together. So you're going to give people a few minutes, 5, 10, something like that, and to write post-it notes in the tool. They all work silently all at once. They write their own notes, and then they start moving them onto that corner of the board. And when the time is up, or when you notice that people are slowing down, they're starting to be a bit dry, don't have enough idea, you can start encouraging them to read each other's ideas, to reach each other's contribution, and to make sure that, that we're all on the same page, we understand the goal, and we have that in common. And then we move on to the negative part of the exercise, where you ask the team to write as many post-it notes as they can about the risks. So what would happen if we are unsuccessful? If the productivity keeps going down and we don't deliver what we're supposed to deliver, what does failure look like? What's the impact of that? So you can list all the risks in there. And this time you don't want people to talk about it too much. You want this to be anonymous so that they can really feel free to talk about everything that they're concerned about. And then in the top right corner, you ask people what drives us, both of the team. It can be obviously achieving the goal, the vision should be a positive outcome in itself, but what drives us as a team, as individuals as well. Some people are in this for the money. Some people are in this because they like the work, they like the people. whatever it might be. And also in terms of process, what helps people to do a good job? Do they need a stand-up meeting in the morning to know what we're working on? Do they need whatever it might be to help the process, right? And the last corner is what drags people down. What slows us down? What are the challenges that prevents us to do good work and that could lead to the risk that we've identified? So that here there as well, you don't really want people to talk about it too much, but just take Post-it notes so that they feel free to express any of their concern. And throughout the exercise, you give them time to reflect. You encourage them to discuss if you've got the time to do that and so on. So at the end, you should have something like that, like this. It's all placeholder ideas, so it may not make a lot of sense, but you get the concepts. And since we're still in the collect phase of the framework, we will not yet be choosing what to work on. This is for later in the choose phase, as you can imagine. But right now, what's important is to make that information visible and easy to manage. So in this example on the screen, there are only a few Post-it notes. And this might be what happens if you have a small team, for example. If you only have 1 or 2 people, you only have a few Post-it notes. But if you've got a big team or it's a big workshop with hundreds of people, you're going to have hundreds of Post-it notes. And you need a way to go through that list and make sense of it. So a thing you can do, it's quite simple, is to group things together. So how do you do that? Well, you start moving things around. You start deleting the duplicates. If there are 2 Post-it notes that are exactly the same, you keep only 1. And then things that are similar, you move them together and you put them on the board somewhere close to each other. And then you ask people if they can start seeing some themes appear through that list. And you can create headings to start naming these themes. And you start moving things up until the point where it all makes sense and you've got a list of, say, 10 categories or 10 themes, which is a lot easier to manage than 50 or 100 different Post-it notes with challenges. We're just going to speed that a little bit. And as a facilitator, obviously, you can help the process a lot by suggesting themes, asking people to clarify what they mean, all these kind of things to speed things up. And here you have it. So now everyone has shared their thoughts, their concerns, their challenges, and you've made that information easier to manage. So that's the good first step for this phase. So then you can start moving on to the choose phase. Now you've got all information. You want to decide what to work on and what to ignore, which is a hard question sometimes. So rather than asking your boss, you just want everyone in the team to be involved in that, to own the decision, to be invested. So you ask them to do that work yourself. You may have noticed how hard it is sometimes as a group to decide what to do. If you ever traveled with a group of friends, for example, and discuss what time you should leave in the morning or, where to go for dinner, it takes forever. So that's because as a group of humans, it's really hard to make decisions. So you need a bit of a framework. You need a few tools to help you. So voting is one of the simplest one you can do. I'm sure you've all been there. If you've been in a workshop, you've done some sticky dot voting. It's pretty simple. Usually give 5 votes per person, usually. It depends. If you've got a big team and a lot of small challenges, you can go a bit higher with 10 votes, for example. You want to keep it reasonably simple. And you ask people to vote for what is causing the most grief, as simple as that. You set a timer, you want this to be pretty quick. You want people to kind of rapid fire rather than overthink things. And you just let the beauty of the ancient Greece democracy, it does its miracle and let's just it happen. No talking at this point, it needs to be anonymous and quick, so that's it. Once it's over, everyone has voted. So that looks a bit like this. You simply count the votes and you put aside the challenges that have been selected with the most votes and you discard the rest. So you just need to be careful with discarding because some people have talked to you about their challenges and they might be very, very much struggling. And if you just throw that thing to the bin because they were the only one voting for it, they might feel a little bit hurt or concerned that their pain is going to continue for a number of time. So you will usually want to frame it as we're going to park it for now, and potentially you can come back to it later on. If you do another workshop with the same team, you might just skip the first few steps and jump into the challenges that have already been listed. So yeah, just be ruthless but gentle when you announce that that you're discarding these ideas. But basically, you work on the best or the most voted ideas. And at this stage, it can be only one sometimes, or you can have 4 or 5, depending on the size of your team and how complex this problem would be. But you start with the biggest challenge, and then you try to reframe it. With the communication experts that we have in the meeting today, I'm sure you understand the importance of putting a positive spin on problems. Nobody likes problem. So it's all about trying to sparkle some inspiration and getting people to be a bit creative. So you use the how might we statements. Basically, for each problem, we reframe it as how might we statement. We try to be a bit open-minded, bring some openness, and not to be prescriptive, which is really hard to do, but you don't want to imply the solution in the statement. So for example, too many meetings, you're not going to cancel every single meeting and forbid everyone to have meetings ever again. That's not going to work. So you want to frame the how might we into something a bit more positive, something a bit more open that could help the team explore different ideas. I just skimmed through the few other examples. The slow internet, well, you're not going to solve the Australian NBN problem yourself. So you want to talk about how you can remain effective in your work without a good internet connection, for example. Or the team is understaffed. You don't want to imply that you have to hire, because hiring might be too hard, might not be possible. So potentially there are other solutions like reducing your workload by refusing projects or whatever else. So you want to keep that statement quite open. Okay, I'm gonna have to go a little bit faster now. So you've finished that session. You've reframed the challenges into statements. That's great. Now it's probably a good time to have a break. Not for us because we don't have time, but in the real workshop, you would probably have been working for 40 minutes, an hour by now. So you probably want to give people a break. And now let's pretend that during this break, this kind of thing happens to you. So what would you do? Well, you better have a good idea and be creative, come up with a cunning plan. But I have a bad news for you. Adults are 96% less creative than they were as children. It's a proper scientific study. I'll share you the link if you want. And so that leads to a myth that some people are creative and some are not. So it's always a bit difficult because as a designer with a bit of experience, I can tell you that's absolutely not true. In fact, scientists have proven that everyone has the gene. It's just that when we grow up, we stop using our creative muscle, I guess. We're too used to think about, converging thinking and getting to decisions rather than diverging and exploring different ways. But again, the good news is that with the tools, a bit of practice, you can all get a lot better, myself included. So let's start with generate, the third step in the framework. How do we generate ideas? How do we create as many ideas as possible? Again, we're not creating solutions yet, just ideas, and we're after quantity rather than quality. So when you plan your workshop for this exercise, you just need to leave a lot of room and you give everyone a space on that board. And you have the how might we statements that relates to the different spaces so that people can start writing post-it notes in their own space, not being disturbed by anyone, right? And you let them do that for a few minutes. And when it starts slowing down or people are stopped working, you remind them that it's anonymous. You encourage them to go wide. You tell them that nothing is off limit at the table at that point, that they shouldn't worry about money or time frame or resources or the current processes because they can change. So you think about ideal world. Once they've done that, you want them to curate, to combine these ideas with everyone so that everyone can review. But since we've been for quantity rather than quality, there are a lot of these ideas that are not very good. So you want people to start removing the ideas that are too silly, too crazy, too hard, whatever they feel, but they do that themselves on their own ideas. So you let them pick their battle pretty much, and you ask them to review their ideas and pick the 10 best one, no more than 10 per participants. Once they've done that, they move the 10 best ideas into one common space on the whiteboard that everyone can share, everyone can see. So they just move the post-it notes to that space. Everyone does that at once. And so you're starting to have a lot of ideas for each of the how might we statements, and they're all the best ideas from every participant. Now, again, if you've got many participants, you might still have many statements, ideas. So you want potentially to group them, just like we did before. You go through the list, you find some themes, you group them together, you remove the duplicates, all that jazz. But if you, in terms of quantity, it's manageable, you just move on. And so what you do then is to start prioritizing. So at this stage, you've proven that your team can have many ideas, but the problem is the ideas are worthless unless they're executed and they're executed well, right? So which one are you going to work on? It's the prioritization step of the framework. So we're trying to figure out which idea the team should work on, which ideas they think are the most promising, and which are not. And in a normal brainstorm, this would just turn into an endless conversation, right? Everyone would say, oh, I think this is good, I think this is good. While here we need a bit of a framework, again, just in case we have many participants. Sorry, there's a bit of noise in the background, it's not gonna last. So what are we gonna do? We're gonna have a first pass. We're gonna give people 10 votes each, once again, and we're gonna let them decide which one they think are the best. We're not yet prioritizing which one is the best or the final solution yet. We're just trying to have a first pass to remove some of the quantity. So it's, again, a good idea to set a timer, go with the flow, gut feeling is fine, don't overthink it. Silent, no conversation at this stage, otherwise you're gonna lose track of the schedule and so on. If an idea is not clear and you don't understand what the person meant, just skip it and move on. So you vote, and then you discard the one that didn't get many votes so that you have a list that's a lot more manageable. So you also tell people that they're allowed to vote for their own ideas, obviously. But just like last time, you just do a voting exercise. They all have a first pass and good to go. Once they've done that, you discard anything without any votes or the cards that have not enough votes. And at the end, you want a maximum of, I don't know, 10 IDs, 15 IDs, probably a good number. The reason is the last step of the prioritization is really about the tip of the iceberg and bringing as much rationality as possible. So you've just done the skimming. Now it's really about ranking these ideas as rationally as possible. So you want to make people accountable for the decisions rather than going with, I think it's a good idea. You say, okay, why? What makes you think? Is it better because, is it better than this one? And so on and so on. So the exercise I've chosen to complete this step is a simple matrix. You measure impact or potential for impact with the required effort. You can assess, ballpark figure whether an idea is hard to implement or easy, and you just start ranking them. And so at the end, it should look a little bit like this. You just have 4 quadrants in the matrix, and you move your ideas and you discuss with the team so that you make sure everyone is happy. And once you've done that, now it's the last bit of decision. You basically need to consider each quadrant ruthlessly, no more negotiation. Use a hard rule to make the next step decision super easy. And basically what's high impact and low effort should be started straight away. You should put your best people at it, the most resources. This is your cash cow idea. And you allocate that straight away to the most senior people and they start working on that. The low impact and low effort should be used as tasks. So you delegate that potentially to your most junior people. It should be treated quickly. You can even set the deadline right away. Should be things that can be done in a day or two. The high impact, high effort should be considered longer term work. So you don't worry about that too much. You're going to plan another meeting and put that in your roadmap. It's longer term work. It should be in the radar, but nothing to action straight away. And the bottom right, which is the low impact and high effort, you just ignore it, right? There's no point focusing on that then. And that's it. That's as simple as that, but you did it. You've generated a lot of ideas in an hour or two. You've organized these ideas to make that easy to manage. You turn each challenge into an opportunity statement to creativity and so on. You've brainstormed the ideas. You remove the biases, or a lot of it. You've created the ideas progressively all the way to have very clear to-do lists, and you start putting timeline on that, and you're good to go. So now you're finishing your workshop with tangible next steps and clear expectations from the team. And so you can pretty much give high five all around. That's as simple as that, at least for this workshop. This is almost the end of this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it and found it a little bit useful. I've packed a lot, I think, in just an hour, so I had to skim a lot on the details. Apologies for that. I'm sure you've got many questions left, so we're going to get to that in just 1 second. Also, please share any feedback, positive or negative, about this presentation in the chat below. This is the first time I give this exact presentation, so I'm keen to get your feedback on that. Questions, yep. And just before we finish, I also want to thank Damien and the IABC again for the opportunity. And a very quick sales message. As I mentioned before, I work at Core Delta Digital for the last few years. And so if you need any help with your workshops or managing a remote team or engaging your stakeholders into some research, some gathering requirements, or help with any website or intranet, we can have a chat at any point.
Awesome.
That's it. You have it.
I was going to save you for your, you can have a little glass of water and take a breath. So a big thank you for the presentation. A couple of questions that have come through, and also just some things that I've picked up. A couple of questions have come through just around the voting and those sorts of things, but I'd like to know about what sort of time frame you need to prepare for these types of workshops.
Yep.
Had a few questions on, like, how do you manage the voting sections, but it all comes down to preparation. How long does it take you to set up, say, a mural board to that size for, like, let's say a 2 to 3 hour workshop? What should you be allocating to yourself?
Yep, excellent question. I had a few mention of timing on the slides, but I didn't talk about it, so it's a good one. Answer is obviously it varies, but the bottom line, the most complex board that I showed you, the first time I worked on it, probably took 3 or 4 hours, to be honest. It's a lot of fiddling around, but it also got a lot quicker the next time around, because you can reuse a lot of the same things and move them around, change the color, change the instructions, slightly the same, but so you can go a lot faster. Something to consider is also on every single tool, Miro, Mural, there are tons of templates that you can use. And some of them are getting really good. They're putting a lot of effort into providing templates. So the sailboat exercise works. I found it somewhere online. A different one, the one I showed you is the one I've used before, but it exists as a template. So yeah, in terms of the time for the workshop itself, a workshop like this short and sharp thing, the Swiss Army knife workshop that I showed you, you would probably run it over an hour and a half or 2 hours, depending on the size of your team. So if you've got the whole time frame, you can break down each activity. Each activity would be around 20, 30 minutes. And then within an activity, you can break it down for producing ideas and then voting. A voting exercise would take between 5 and 10 minutes. But as a whole, when you do things online, you want to allocate more time than if you were face-to-face, usually around 30% more or 50% more, because people are slower. It's weird, but it's just like that. Yeah. And then you run your first workshop and you just do like me, and you'd be average the first time, and then you'd get better.
And so on that point, which sort of goes to the sort of headline for today's session, which is, how do you avoid your workshop sucking, basically. So have there been any that you've done, you've set it all up, you've started to run the workshop and it's gone pear-shaped? What have you done?
Oh, yes, many times.
What's the key to keeping the momentum up on that sort of thing?
You've got to wing it, but the secret, I guess, or the best thing you can do is just remind people that this is just the kickoff of any work. You're going to work on the problems and generate ideas, and then potentially flesh out some of the ideas in the workshop. But you're never going to solve the whole thing in a 2 hours meeting. You're going to decide what to work on, and you're going to decide what the team should focus on the next few days. So if something goes wrong, someone is unhappy, someone has to leave halfway through, whatever happens, you just take a step back and understand that there will be another opportunity to re-engage the same people, or you can ask the same questions later on. Another thing that I forgot to mention is you don't have to do everything live. The beauty of the virtual whiteboard is that it's available 24/7. So you can ask people to come back later on if you haven't had time to finish, for example, because everything derailed dramatically. And you can ask people to come back later on their own time and fill up more information and so on. So you can basically, you have to remind yourself that you don't have to solve everything in one go, and just go with the flow.
Cool. Another good question that sort of popped in. Obviously, having workshops, you want to create that sort of discussion as well. How do you sort of encourage people to sort of jump into the spotlight and discuss maybe some of their ideas? Is there any best way to do that?
I don't know if there is a best way, but just the fact that everyone is creating ideas, feedback, opinions, or sharing these things in writing, first of all, helps a lot of people. They usually don't need to explain too much. If you have a group of participants who are very quiet, for example, and there's not a lot of energy, there's not a lot of ideas generated, you can switch. I can change pace, first of all, but also switch the way you work and ask them things orally. So you can say, for example, hey, I see these Post-it notes on the board, and I was wondering if someone could expand on that. And if the person who's written that Post-it note is not comfortable, they may not say anything, but someone else will probably jump in and say, well, I understand it that way, and I think it's almost the same as what I wrote here, and blah, blah, blah. And you just get people to talk a bit more. But you have to accept that some people, some organizations, depending on their culture and so on, will be more talkative than others, will have more to share, will be more comfortable. The whole thing is to get as much value as you can from the group, but each group is different.
Okay.